Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
I know we all want to get away from this dark space, but the more we get away from it, the longer we will stay in it. So let's perhaps
Yes.
stay in the dark for a while and hold each other's hand and see where we go. Professor Alain, do you think there is a question of degree? Meaning, going back to your beginning of your presentation and how long a person is subjected to one image or another, the more that image is fixated and the more they are preconditioned by it. If we apply that to the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or rather the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because it's not quite so simple, do you think that the two sides have been exposed for so long and so intensively to particular narratives that it is unreasonable, unrealistic, maybe even unfair to actually expect one side to have empathy for the other side? I'm raising the idea of a question of degree. Might it reach such an extreme situation, and have we reached that extreme situation, that in fact the first stage to reaching a solution is creating a safe haven for both sides, safety from each other, if necessary, by the use of force? And this is the problem. Have we reached a point where now the only way is not to wait until the war is over, which I've heard too many times already, because waiting until the war is over means waiting until even more people have been slaughtered by one side or the other. But are we reaching the point where now, if necessary by force, safe haven has been created for both sides to allow the temperature to start to come down a little bit, and then they can start perhaps to have empathy and see how the rights of each side could be achieved in a way that is not a threat to the other side? Because there are two problems. One is how to achieve the right, and then how to get to that point of achieving the rights. Do you think we are at that point, or do you think it is still reasonable to expect empathy by one side for the other to a sufficient degree,
Yes.
especially when people from each side will have their own narrative as part of their identity? Even if they have empathy for the other side, expressing it will make them alienated from their own side. I'll end there. Thank you.
Yeah, Ramsey, I think you are absolutely right. And how much you have suffered probably has decreased empathy towards the other side to an extent that we need to acknowledge that and not judge it. You see, I should put the quote that I love from Spinoza on this. He says, I strive not to judge human behaviors, not to hate them, not to make fun of them, but to understand them. And in so many ways, what and as I was preparing this talk, I was thinking, God, I mean, it's getting really dark what I'm doing here. And that's what you're saying, the dark side, right? I mean, let's be honest, it has been quite dark for both sides. And the darkness has darkened, if that makes any sense to say, during the last month. But it is not as if it was bright before. It might have been bright in some ways, but not for everyone, right? So I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, is that we need to accept the fact that we cannot expect empathy at this point towards the other side, which is a very strange point, because in the field of dispute resolution, it's always about empathy, isn't it? We need to develop empathy. I mean, if your child has been killed, I don't know what kind of empathy you would have for the other side, right? Let me give you one example, a personal example. So my mother, who died 20 years ago, went through the Second World War. And I'm telling you, she didn't like, she was born in Belgium and she suffered a lot during the war. She didn't like the Germans. Well, I mean, this is a nice way of saying it. She hated the Germans. This is a feeling I can't even feel. I don't know how it's possible to hate the Germans. Why? Because I have been in a situation when I'm born in 1965, when I've seen that the best enemies of the world have become the best friends. So if there's one thing I would say here, Ramsey, which is maybe the hope or the light in the tunnel of darkness, right, is that whenever people say this is intractable, well, I think that is correct, that it is for a while. We can't expect people who have killed each other so badly to suddenly like each other the next day. But that's why I give the example of France and Germany, or Belgium and Germany, is that they were really the worst enemies. Just tell me in 1945 that it was possible for these two nations to today become the best neighbors on earth of each other. That's good news. So, but it required institution, it required a lot of courage, it required leadership. When de Gaulle was in the Reims Cathedral with Chancellor Adenauer, and when they were praying together, there's something strange, because the Minister of Information of de Gaulle, when de Gaulle said, and of course, and the people of France and Germany embrace this new alliance, the Minister of Information, Alain Perfit of the time, said, but General, there is no crowds in the streets. And de Gaulle said, il faut faire comme si pour que ce soit comme ça. We need to do as if in order for that to happen, right? So what I'm saying is that is it possible for people who are bombed every day in Ukraine to love the Russians? How could you love some people who bomb you? Is it possible for Palestinians to love the Israelis? Of course not. But is it possible for the Israelis to like or have empathy towards also the Palestinians who have done what happened on the 7th of October? You see, the point is that there are I think that it has gone so dark, so badly dark, that we cannot expect this empathy immediately. We just need to know that through the right processes, Israel and Palestine will have to live in peace. What does that mean today? They will have to develop empathy. Is it only cognitive empathy first, right? That's maybe what it is. It's just acknowledging what is important to the other side. I hate you, but I know what is important for you, each side, right? And maybe that's the first way to go, putting the right structures. But I think that also what you said, which I find very relevant, is that maybe at this point, safe havens for each side, safe places for each side is more important than a place together for both sides. Or there is a grieving moment on both sides that requires to be with each side needs to be with each side, right? I think that in the field of conflict resolution, we always love bicommunal activities. Well, I'm not sure at this point. Right? I think there is a need for people to first feel good with each other, feel better with each other, and maybe you're right, Ramsey. Maybe it's a safe space that is enforced, right? Where this is not your space, and we protect it. We will protect it, right? What is very sad is that there is nothing new in this at this time that we really didn't already know before the Oslo Agreement. And so what is terrible is that we thought, right, the all international community thought that there had been a process of empathy unfolding that would make that peace process irreversible. As we know, the expression peace process, everyone makes fun of it in the region. Say, what are you talking about? It's a joke. It has been a joke. That's been a joke. So I think what you're saying is right. There is a need for the temperature to go down. You see the temperature of hatred to go down for the possibility of empathy to reemerge. Except if you are a Zen master, I don't see how you could really feel empathy for people who make you suffer. And in all fields, we make sometimes the assumption it's possible. As a mediator myself, I know that the process itself will reintroduce a little bit of empathy. But how sustainable is it? Yes, for a minute in a mediation session, right? I may recognize what you're saying, and therefore I may even empathize with you. But how long? Is it long-lasting? Is it sustainable? When I get out of the session, when I back to my group, when I maybe face the same aggression in one way or another, these little drops of empathy that were built in that private, safe session suddenly again fall apart. And it makes, of course, the life of peacemakers extremely difficult.
Professor Alain, actually, I sometimes in most extreme situations say, I hope we are starting from a point of zero empathy and zero trust. Because if you have zero empathy, then what are we going to do with all this emotion? The answer, I suggest, is what South Africa did. Take it to court and pursue accountability through legal channels, which means that each side is not expected to like the other side, see the human in the other side, feel kindness toward the other side. No. It's unreasonable It's an offense to the dead to even say that. So we can transform the emotions into legal accountability, but not let that negative emotion that be an obstacle to finding a reasonable solution going forward. Because empathy, or the lack of empathy, is related to what happened in the past. And it's a result of a machine, a monstrous, vile, evil machine producing suffering. So we have to stop the machine first, and then to deal with the product of the machine through the court, and separately, in parallel, look at the way forward, which comes to, first of all, giving safe haven for both sides, and then looking at what is a reasonable solution in the context of the rights, the concerns, the fears of people from both sides. And then we don't need to think about empathy. That can happen naturally later once normal relationships are developed between the two states. That might be a solution. Oh, and the reason I say, by the way, zero trust, sorry, I forgot to elaborate on that. I always say zero trust will mean maximum cross-checking. It means you need to have trust-building measures then with some kind of neutral observation, and that is more likely to maintain the stability of whatever agreement they reach. So it's an ironic, perhaps controversial point, starting with zero trust and zero empathy, but it can lead to a more durable solution in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe a few points building on what you're saying. The problem in okay, I see how what you're suggesting could work between two individuals, right? Is that there is a moment when you can't talk to each other, where negotiation fails. You can't even talk in presence of a third party, mediation fails. And then it looks like the only way of stopping this, and then that's what you're saying, you need to stop this, you need to stop the fight, is to adjudicate the dispute and get a decision. And you see, there it is, it's a forceful decision. It's a decision by might, by force, by law, by courts. But you see the problem that I don't see how it applies in international relations, except if suddenly some parties put all their weight to stop the conflict. But for example, I don't see how you would impose on Russia to stop their war. I don't know. It's extremely difficult to impose on Israel to stop the war right now. But I agree that if you have the capacity to do this, right? If you had an international system, maybe a transnational system that would actually say this is outlawed and we need to stop it now. If the UN had the capacity to deploy itself and then stop it, right? They can't even defend the humanitarians, right? But so it's not even, it was a peacemaking operation, right? It's not even peacekeeping. It's not even humanitarian. I don't even see at the moment, but it's something to think about. Maybe there should be some ways of making that fight stop. To make Russia stop, it could lead to a world war. I mean, I think that what you're describing is something that I don't see very often happening, except if one side, of course, if one side wins, then again it's the victory by might. But when you have overwhelming might, for example, on the Israeli side, and you have underwhelming might on the Palestinian side. You have overwhelming might of Russia and trying to matching might on the Ukrainian side, right? So the Ukraine is not helped enough to win the war. It just helps slightly enough not to lose it. So in a way, we are keeping the conflict alive rather than trying to stop it. But stopping it would be a great way of, if there was a way of stopping it. Who would be doing this? I have no clue in the current context of international system. That shouldn't be called a system for all of the failures we just talked about.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certification designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
I'm trying to think really, how can we bring empathy for this situation that we are living? Theoretically, it's something that you can imagine, but when you are inside, it's not easy. I'm a mediator. I was before in the Palestinian officially side in negotiations, and I really believe that we use negotiation, and in negotiation, I can't imagine if there is a place for empathy because it's win-lose. And out of that, it's the war all the time. And we failed in Oslo and after. And we are now in a situation, it's very difficult, very complicated, and non-stop. And I'm trying really to think, how can we bring empathy to the table? Because there is no table. Even the mediators, when they are talking about the situation, they don't show empathy. So to be honest, I did all my best to put myself in my side and the other side, even my people. Yani, if I start talking about empathy now, my people, they don't want to hear this voice. What are you talking about? Empathy for whom and with whom? And you know what? And for the other side, you can if I say that, you know what, I can understand what I will receive, that wow, good guy, thank you. So
Thanks.
it's very complicated, Alan. Yani, yeah.
I guess I can just say two things here. Many of us who have been in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Israel have this sense that, I mean, of empathy at different times for what is the most horrible things that are happening, right? So I was in Gaza a few years ago, and I was there with different groups of people. I was there with some kids, many wonderful kids, and all the images coming from Gaza absolutely break my heart. And it's the same way I felt when I saw the images of what happened on October 7th, how people in their lives were slaughtered the way they were. So what I want to say is that and I felt also when I was in the West Bank, there are some places where the occupation is so hard, the cages so inconceivable for any human mind, that the fact of going there, feeling what it is to live there, makes you keep that empathy. And the overwhelming feeling I have right now is absolute sadness. When I was in Gaza, I said, I don't want you to die. When we were discussing issues, I said, I don't want you to die. And when a few months later, there were some actions, and there were Israeli soldiers killed, but also about 2,000 Palestinians killed, I said, God, that's not it. That's not it. And again, I feel the same today. If you have 1,300 Israelis dying on 7th of October, and then 32 or 33,000 Palestinians, half of them kids, dying in Gaza, this is not the way to go. So you see, and here you see, I move from sadness to some kind of an anger that some leaders have not been up to the task to really get their acts together the way Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin did. And we know what happened to the Oslo process. And you know, what is terrible is that you're right, there is no table. Where's the table? There is no table. Roger Fisher, when we were talking about trust, and it's linking the two conversation, right? When Roger was, sometimes he was saying, well, you know what, sometimes there is no trust. And now we are adding, sometimes there is no empathy. And what Roger used to say, he said, well, we need to learn to negotiate independently of trust. And now I add this, not very original, but I plagiarized my mentor. We need to negotiate independently of empathy. We cannot expect Palestinians to have any empathy towards Israelis. We cannot expect any Israeli to have any empathy towards Palestinians. Okay, that's a given. And then, of course, and that goes back to Ramses' point, then we need to have guarantees, right? If we have no trust, we need other powers involved to make sure that if there is an agreement, the agreement stays, that there is that everyone is safe on each side, and that will be a hard one. I think what is next to sadness and anger, there is also this terrible feeling of powerlessness. Right? It's what to do next, how to do it. Because the problem is not as if the best Palestinian minds, some of the best Palestinian minds, some of the best Israeli minds have not thought about this. This is like sorry to say, this is the blind spot of conflict resolution. We as a community have absolutely failed. We have failed as a community. And it's a wonderful community. It's a community of good people with good hearts, good intentions. But it is, as again, what is at stake here is that whatever has been done, whatever has been tried, it has not worked, because here we are again with tens of thousands of people killed, and with nothing is better now than it was before October 7th. You see, that's the problem, except that it's back on the agenda. Why was it not on the agenda when there was not such a attack on October 7th and then the war after? So now there's another feeling here. It's a feeling of absolute stupidity. Let me say what I mean by that. You see, France and Germany had a war in 1870, and one side won. Then there was another war in 1914, and then the other side won in 1918, and was humiliated afterwards in the Versailles Treaty. And then there was another war in 1939 that led to the victory of Germany in 1940, Germany being defeated in 1945. So here you have two nations, and you have a lot of people dying, millions of them dying, and that's stupidity, isn't it? Because the same cycle is happening over and over and over, and nothing is done to change it. So the point is that what happened after 1945, with all the failures of the European institutions, is to do the best, and I don't dare to use the word make sure, but nearly to make sure that the members of the European Union, and Germany and France in particular, would never be fighting against each other. And in that sense, that's the good news for us again, my friends, here in this situation, is that we need to start looking not simply about this terrible past that makes it with things irreparable. I think that why is the zero empathy? Because what was done on October 7th was irreparable. In the eyes of the Israelis, it's irreparable in a way. But the same way what is done today in Gaza is irreparable for the Palestinian people. So you see, that's where suddenly we are in that situation where you cannot expect that empathy, you cannot expect the trust, and still you have to figure out that this narrow path to work on how to do a better job so that history doesn't repeat itself again, right? So, and because it's not simply about getting people at the table. There were many tables. It didn't work. It's working on not simply guarantees. It's much more than that needs to be done. And knowing that on both sides, there are people who don't want that peace, who prefer to stick to their dreams or them, which is the nightmares of others, than to start thinking about what is realistic, what could be actually achieved versus what the dream of expelling the other side, absolutely expelling the other side of the region.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certification designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
As a Ukrainian, I'm speaking to you today from Ukraine, beautiful and unbreakable. Right now, I agree, we cannot talk about trust and empathy between sides in conflict. If I'm speaking about from my experience as a party in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But I would like to share my personal experience with you all. At the beginning of the war, I would say that there was some trust, not trust, some empathy from Ukrainians towards Russian prisoners of war, because we heard many stories of Russian soldiers told that they do not want this war, and Ukrainians believe them, and I would say we even had some empathy, but it was when there were no daily attacks, so this empathy was destroyed, and we are at this point cannot talk about empathy toward them, and I think there is a way to coexist peacefully. And as a mediator myself, I believe in mediation, negotiations, that we can use these tools, these processes to build some maybe minimum trust between parties in conflict, and maybe After your presentation, Alan, I was thinking about maybe there is a way to build some trust through recognition and acknowledgements of struggles. For example, if we have some proven signs of trust, if agreements are kept, because as we all see, for example, in Ukrainian-Russian war, agreements are just words.
You know, I felt the same way you did. At the beginning of the war, I was quite surprised to see that there were the Minsk talks between Russian negotiators and Ukrainian negotiators. And you're right, there were still some examples of empathy towards each side, but that's what I'm saying, that unfortunately, as the conflict increases, right, empathy decreases. That's what I was called the law of atrophy of empathy. And I think that what was irreparable was what happened in Bucha. I think that what happened there, suddenly it becomes nearly impossible for anyone, I'm not even talking about Ukrainians, but to sit at a table when that is done, right? And I think that you see what every party in any conflicts need to think about is whatever the goals they have, and sometimes they think the only way of achieving their goals is to wage a war with the means they have, is what you would call in humanitarian terms mitigation. Conflict mitigation. You really need to respect some of these key laws of respect for civilians, non-combatants, you hospitals. I think that the problem is and you see all the parties have signed these agreements, the Geneva Conventions, etc., right? But it's extremely troubling that by not respecting the minimum legal standards in conflicts, somehow the parties tend to commit the irreparable. If that's the case, there's hardly any negotiation or mediation possible, which is extremely sad, right? It's becoming, then it becomes just a power of using, it's just power that seems to be the only argument that can prevail. And that's why, looking at what's happening between Israelis and Palestinians, the only way of stopping this is to stop ammunitions. There's a moment when the United States and other countries need to stop giving the weaponry to just make that war every day with worse in terms of casualties, and also to impose the humanitarian convoys to be able to go and avoiding famine. I mean, you see what I'm saying is that when you are at the point of dehumanizing of others, that you commit irreparable acts like this, it is extremely difficult to be at the table with a person who is doing that. Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. If you think about what was done by some political protagonists in the former Yugoslavia, they were at the Dayton talks, and some of them afterwards were brought to The Hague, are war criminals. So, well, sometimes we need to keep the possibility of peace talks, even with people who are committing terrible crimes, because I mean, as one of my former students said, we really need to distinguish the logic of war, and it can hopefully be stopped not by might, but by negotiation, some kind of mediation, and the logic of justice, which is what Ramsey was talking about probably, which is how do we make sure that the worst crimes don't go unpunished? The same way there were war crime tribunals after the genocide in Rwanda and after what happened with the Shoah, the Holocaust during the Second World War. I think that the moment we start having war crimes or crimes against humanity, we need to distinguish the need to stop the war, but we can't go with impunity in the long run. But these are two separate questions. We need to separate these two questions. It's terrible to say that for people who are the victims, but their priority right now is to stop the slaughtering. Stop this as fast as possible and build that some kind of a just peace up to then justice and history to make the judgment of. We will see what history will think about Putin or Netanyahu. We will see how history judge.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
I've had conversations about the logic of justice, and I feel very strongly that there needs to be, in terms of sustainable peace, some form of justice. In terms of empathy, what I've been looking at, facilitating empathy circles, because in this process, there is no goal of agreement. I think there is so much pain that agreement would lead to some type of moral equivalency. So the opportunity just to hear, really, really hear someone and their grief and their pain and suffering, and reflect back what you heard without judgment, without agreement, without any kind of acceptance to be required. I think that is a very powerful dialogue opportunity to perhaps build a bridge to empathy, just to see someone as a human being and to treat someone as a human being.
Thank you, Tina, for what you shared with us. It's the 30th celebration of the genocide in Rwanda this month. And I think that we all know that it was not simply about stopping the genocide. It was about, and what you talk about, the sustainable peace that has to have an important dimension of, do I dare to use this word right now? But the reconciliation, right? And of course, as you were talking, I was thinking that in the wildest dreams, right, we need a TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, between Israelis and Palestinians, because I think that there is a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And I think that there are a lot of organizations that are composed of mothers, parents, relatives of people who have been killed and work together. So that's and they work with the methods that you described that are extraordinary methods, second nature methods of empathy building. Okay,
Yes.
This is be another thing, but that's when you were describing so well how if you have these listening sessions where people can really say everything they went through and all the pain they have, and because that's also what was happening in the Gachacha in Rwanda, but also what must happen in any place when they've been suffering. The fact that I can speak about my pain, that I sometimes can be acknowledged by the other side about my pain, that's the problem, isn't it? Because it's not, I want to hear from the other side somehow. How much pain, whatever, it's not you in particular, but it's the systemic violence, right? That is at stake here, needs to be out there. And so that's what happens. This must happen all over the United States with the First Nations. I think that there is not enough of that, but that's also, the work is immense, right? I mean, the problem is that history is full of that suffering. It's very hard to create these sustainable peace systems if this pain is not out there, acknowledged, and we could move forward, right? I think that there are miracles. You see, Germany, and in particular, Konrad Adenauer, I go back to his leadership. He asked for forgiveness to Israel, and of course, it is not enough to express deep remorse, but we still need to hear that in so many other places where like colonialism, or there have been so much pain has been inflicted and not enough acknowledgement is, right? And I think that's also the problem. Unfortunately, you see, many of you have, because many of you are also working in the US, have been aware of what was happening on campuses during the last few months. And being at Rwanda, as I'm telling you, I went, like many students and colleagues, through a series of shocks. One of the shocks is that I don't feel in the US in particular, and it took a long time for people, even in positions of power in the United States, currently in the positions of power, to develop as much empathy for the suffering of one side as they did for the other. And I think that's why many students said, we can't believe what's happening right now in Gaza, and nobody is doing anything. And so I think that what you described also, Tina, was we had incredible listening sessions at Brandeis because the pain was on both sides. You had people lost their loved ones on October 7th, but you had also students who had also felt a lot of pain, similar pains for what was happening to people in Gaza. So, and you see, that's the kind of places we need to develop. And but I guess it might be, sorry to say that, it might be a little early right now, because I don't, that's going back to the conversation with Ramsey. I think at the moment, too often I meet too many people of one side who don't have empathy for the other side.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
Maybe the lack of hope is the main source of hope. Maybe the absence of trust, the absence of reliance, of empathy is the main dose of realism that we can now take serious steps to resolve this conflict. The main ingredients of resolving an extremely violent conflict are actually quite simple. One is for there to be a third party, ideally with good support, to be able to be a neutral guarantor of no further violence from one side against the other side, and further, that any damage caused by violence will be immediately rebuilt, restored in any way possible. And so to really separate rebuilding from accountability, these two have to be separated so that one is not a barrier to the other. Then, if that can be achieved, and I think it can be actually, and I'll say why. Because if this situation carries on as it is doing, it will lead ultimately to a real war in the region. And at some point, the USA will find it needs to intervene, either to militarily save Israel from further destruction if it's engaged in a wider ranging war, or preemptively to prevent the situation getting that bad in the first place. So and it'll be cheaper to intervene militarily sooner rather than later, before it becomes a more wider ranging conflict. And so here lies the hope. I think, like I said before, an enforced separation or disengagement of forces, and then a ceasefire backed up by guarantor or guarantors, that any damage is straight away fixed, it doesn't matter who is responsible, and separately pursue who is responsible and make whoever is responsible pay for financially for the work that had to be done to repair the damage. This formula can be effective. I think the failure, even failure to respect Geneva Conventions, means no trust in any side to do anything. That means we don't need to be so lazy, sorry to use that word, hoping for trust or humanity or empathy. And once we get real about it and say, okay, we cannot trust one side or the other, we can't expect either side to trust the other, forget trust, forget empathy, we have to now prevent the evil machine that is generating suffering. We have to stop it and arrive at a formula that will safeguard the basic needs and wants and rights and concerns of all people, including access to security, peace, food, shelter, prosperity. Then you have a solution. Until we continue relying on empathy or trust, my dear friends, we are wasting time and allowing more people to be killed. I'm sorry to be so brutal.
Thank each and every one of you for your contribution to the discussion. At this point, I would love to give the floor back to Professor Alain so that he can give his closing remark.
I want to summon my favorite philosopher, Spinoza here, and Spinoza, in a way, he's also very much aware of human nature, and that probably echoes what Ramsey just said here. Is that first learning not to judge, right? That we already talked about that, which is it's very hard in a conflict that bad. But the second point that he says, and that goes back also to what Tina said earlier, that you can out-mean the mean. But what Spinoza would say is that the only way of, and that would be nearly a quote from Martin Luther King, the only way of overcoming all of this hatred, and that's probably the positive things here that he's mentioning, is that love is a very good tool actually against all of this bad stuff. Love and a little bit of so my idealistic self that comes back at the very end of this talk, right? I think that if there is only way we could get out of this situation in better shape is that if we don't respond with meanness and brutality to brutality and meanness, if we find a way of giving a chance to rights, right, the rights of all the parties, that will also make a big difference forward. And of course, it could translate into the very concrete steps that Ramsey said, right? That you need a guarantor, you need probably a strong presence of the countries that either side respects and would consider appropriate. I think that that would make a big difference. There is a little bit of a window here right now, bizarrely enough, before the US election. The US can play a few cards to stop the war much faster than any other country. And then we have the incredible also support of Qatar and other countries that have, Egypt and others who have been working so hard to make sure that on one side, some of the hostages would be released. And also on the other side, that there would be a ceasefire. So I think that, if some of this is in place, I think that maybe all of this was a blessing in disguise in a way, right? That all of these bad stuff that had been happening could actually lead to an outcome that could be better than we could ever expect. But I think that's maybe without the empathy first, without the trust first, and building it. And I like with this circle of empathy that Tina talked about. I would just say that empathy is the consequence of the circle and not the prerequisite. That's how I would stop.
Thank you so very much. There is a lot of things to talk about. Unfortunately, we cannot cover everything in one session. I therefore hope you will join us for the second session next Thursday. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can support us by leaving a 5-star review. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast to stay informed whenever we upload a new episode. See you in the next episode.